League of Legends is a game that more than deserves its seat at the pantheon of timeless games, once-in-a-generation titles that transcend the ephemeral status of flavor of the month and enjoy years, nay decades, of sustained popularity. For all the hate and backlash it gets, frankly rightfully so, no one can deny that this game is quite literally a billion-dollar idea. Even so, no game, no matter how great, is without flaws, some more persistent than others, and for today I wanted to make a fun little video going through some of the dumbest things I, and I'm sure many of you, have noticed about League that really shouldn't be there. There are obviously far too many to fit into one video, so if you feel like it's worth making a follow-up episode in the future, let me know in the comments down below what are some other weird things about the game. Without further ado, let's get into it. Quite possibly the single most confounding feature of this godforsaken title would be the completely meaningless existence of the Z-axis. For the uninitiated, in a top-down game, the X and Y axes represent the ground floor, X being left and right and Y being up and down. For such a game as League, that's really all you need to care about, with the 3D elements being primarily an aesthetic choice to create more visual depth to the game. However, for whatever reason, there's a Z-axis in this game, up and down, implying the game is elevation, which would make no sense to have in a video game that's effectively a static isometric bird's eye view, where such elevation is difficult to properly gauge. Yet the game has it. It's most visible when you look at the entrances to the river between lanes. Visually, you can see the pathways connecting into the river having a decline slope of sorts, giving off the impression that the river is at a lower elevation. In theory, this should be nothing but just a visual thing. But due to said visual thing, it can make champion and ability positioning deceptive on the eyes. Most games that feature an isometric perspective rely on positional hitboxes over physical model hitboxes. In fighting games, for example, the entire character model is a hitbox, meaning if your attack manages to make contact with your opponent's arm, foot, or head, for example, it will register a hit on the target, making it so your goal is to simply just attack the character itself. Not so the case in League. For this sort of game, champion hitboxes are wholly based on what is known as their gameplay radius, or in simple terms, every champion is effectively a walking circle on the floor. If a skill shot makes contact with that circle, that is what determines a hit, not whether your projectile makes contact with the champion's body. And with the isometric camera being the way it is, basically every champion is pulling a Michael Jackson Smooth Criminal and leaning in a slanted way while they play. Why I'm telling you all of this is because it explains why there are far too many instances of a skill shot completely missing a champion even though it clearly looks like it landed, while other skill shots appear as if they missed by a mile, yet for some inexplicable reason made contact. The ones people tend to zero in on are hook type champions. Everyone has had that game where they saw a Blitzcrank or a Nautilus hook travel in a straight line, then out of nowhere it yoinks you just when you thought you were clear of it. Here's an example.
What?
If you slow it down to a frame by frame, which I'll have my editor do on screen while explaining, the Blitz hook appears to be headed straight for the minion, but then snaps on Tezreal to pull him. In kind of a frustrating way, this is actually a very working as intended interaction. The game is working properly based on the system it was built on. It's the system itself that's stupid. What essentially happened here was Ezreal's gameplay radius, aka detection circle, aka hitbox, was ever so slightly bigger than the minion's gameplay radius he was standing next to, which in this specific instance might have had to be mere pixels more. Like with most skill shots, Rocket Grab hooks the first target hit. Unfortunately for Ezreal, his circle was protruding outward just a bit more than the minion, ultimately leading to him getting grabbed. In other words, when landing skill shots on a champion, you want to actually go for their feet because that's where the hitbox really is. The problem with this strategy is that for a lot of champions, it's kind of hard to tell exactly where their feet are, especially if they don't have feet. Human model champions are easy to target because they have a consistent figure and feet by which they walk on, but for someone like, say, Aurelion Sol, who has a massive tail floating around, despite having a very large model, you can easily miss abilities on him. Here's one last example of a skill shot that visually looks like it should have landed right on target, but due to the Z-axis, it missed completely.
I'm pretty sure he's going on.
What's not going on? Oh my.
How the f?
W.
Wait, how did that miss? That was like right on top of it.
No idea.
For those wondering why the visual indicator and the actual bullet fired was in a completely different spot, that's because the indicator jinxed W being attached to the floor, while visually the bullet fired is obviously mid-air. Now, if you're wondering how it missed Rek'Sai despite appearing right on top of her, that's because Rek'Sai's gameplay radius is centered around her front, like where her front claws and mouth are, where her feet are, quote-unquote. The rest of her body, including rear and tail, are purely visual. Cutie just aimed a little too high. To add on to that, the champion gameplay radii is honestly extremely inconsistent in this game. There are some champions that are visually modest in size and yet they're easier to hit then champions considerably larger than them. The smallest champions in the game are the Yordles, the children-type characters like Annie and Milia, and then Yumi, at 55 units, no doubt contributing to the Yordles in particular being so annoying to fight. The majority of champions have a gameplay radii of 65, but here is where things begin to stop making sense. As an example, take Elise, very thin, very slender character. Did you know that she has the same hitbox size as Nunu? Yes, a giant yeti has the same hitbox as a woman. Well, monster woman, but you get the point. Relevantly, Rek'Sai is also the same size despite being a pretty wide character. Even though Aatrox gets noticeably bigger when casting World Ender, he has the same hitbox size as Jhin. All the more reason why when landing skill shots you have to aim for their feet. That's the only consistent way to hit everything. Except it isn't when several champions have bigger models than feet. I'm making such a big deal about this because it's a very real issue with the game that hasn't really been formally addressed by Riot for League specifically. Across all media platforms, including YouTube, you have videos teaching you how to land skill shots more consistently, which only goes to show you how dumb this mechanic is. More pressing, however, is that Wild Rift, the mobile version of League which is made on a different engine, does not have a Z-axis at all. You can actually notice a clear difference in visual depth between Wild Rift and League's respective maps, making it way more straightforward to aim abilities at champions. Though, mind you, most of the time, if a projectile appears to visually touch a champion's model, it's gonna land. These moments are clearly edge cases and not indicative of the norm, but that this even happens to begin with and is pronounced enough that players have to actively play in consideration of it is enough for me to want to make note of it. The system isn't bugged per se, rather it's just not clearly explained to the players so they can go their entire life playing the game without truly understanding how it works. The next feature I want to go over is another very small yet extremely annoying gripe I have with the game, and I know for a fact there is not a single soul in God's green earth that actually wants this system in the game. I'm talking about minion block. As you know, every entity in this game has a collision radius to prevent units from stacking on top of each other infinitely, so as to allow players the ability to clearly target and select who they want to be attacking. Sounds like a relatively harmless if not potentially important thing to have in the game, right? You don't want things to be stacking on top of each other like crazy. They do have this stuff in other games as well, like Minecraft. Minion block, however, notably refers to the instance of a champion's pathing being obstructed due to minions preventing you from walking over them or through them, oftentimes resulting in the champion moving around them. Movement in League is based on mouse clicks, wherein upon right-clicking on a spot, the game formulates the fastest route it takes for your champion to walk to that spot. The problem is that sometimes, if minions are too closely together, the game's pathing system will try to circumvent that by going around the minions, which in turn might have you accidentally move into a spot you don't want to, such as in the line of fire of an enemy skill shot, or more dangerously, unintentionally walking into enemy turret range. In other occasions, minion block might cause you to be unable to run away from or chase after opponents. Even more frustrating is how inconsistent it can be, sometimes not happening whatsoever and other times happening very conspicuously. Keep in mind, there are several ways to remove your champion's collision detection, also known as ghosting. Units that are ghosted can freely walk through other moving entities without having to path around them. Most movement, positioning, or tempo-based abilities in the game already come with ghosting built into them. For example, Udyr's Blazing Stampede or Volibear's Thundering Smash enable them to ignore unit collision so as to allow them to make a beeline for their target without minions getting in the way. Likewise, anything requiring real-time ability positioning also comes with ghosting such as Garani, Darius Q, Camille W, what have you. Curiously, both Fizz and Kassadin passively ignore unit collision altogether. There's also the universal way to ignore unit collision, being the Ghost Summoner spell. As you can see, unit collision is a pretty major thing based on all the systems and mechanics implemented around it. Unfortunately, that also happens to include all the possible negative repercussions of such a feature. Just like with the Z-axis, Wild Rift does not have unit collision whatsoever, at least for champions. Minions still have them so as to prevent them from stacking on top of each other endlessly, but champions are able to walk through minions without interruption. Despite having played the game for north of 11 years now, I never understood the practical benefit of unit collision. Minion block is to this day one of the most pointless mechanics in the game. It serves no advantage to being there beyond the prevention of enemies sitting on top of each other for the purposes of target selection. But like I said, you can have that rule applied to just minions and monsters. There's no reason why champions should have unit collision whatsoever. If anything, the fact that there are so many abilities and ways to ignore unit collision only serves to underline that minion block is nothing more than an inconvenience most of the time. This next one's a personal gripe I have with the game, even though most of the time it doesn't apply to me unless I'm fighting Tryndamere or something. League of Legends at its core is meant to be a competitive game that holds player skill, execution, and decision making as top priority. Therefore, any semblance of randomness or RNG should be kept as infinitesimal so as not to cause major fluctuations in the outcome of anything. To its credit, League has very few elements decided entirely by randomness. What few elements that still remain present are designed to be a potential benefit to both teams, such as the elemental drakes for example. I mean, you could argue Mountain Soul is kind of broken against a burst-heavy enemy team, or giving Cloud Soul to a team with Master Yi, Dr. Mundo, and Swain elevates their threat capacity far more than giving it to Xerath and Yuumi. Either way, rarely can you chalk up something happening to good or bad luck. But there's one part of the game that can lead to frustration more often than not: critical strike chance. Crit chance, like in the case of any other video game, is the possibility of an attack doing increased damage. If you have 50%, your attacks have a coin flip chance of landing a critical hit. Such a gameplay element doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have in a game that highlights player skill and execution, yet I wouldn't consider it the most offensive thing out there. Matter of fact, to somewhat alleviate your dependence on law of large numbers, the game implements a pity system of sorts. Say for example you have 25% crit chance and your first attack does not crit. The game will then artificially bump up your crit chance by an arbitrary amount to make it so your next attack is more likely to crit. And if that attack also fails, it bumps it up even more until your attack eventually is guaranteed to critically strike. The idea behind this is to make it so every 4 attacks or so at worst you're gonna critically strike. Makes sense after all, 25% is 1 in 4. The annoying thing about probability is the potential for short-term variance. Though highly improbable, it is very much within the realm of possibility for a 50-50 coin flip to result in heads 20 times in a row, despite theoretically being supposed to alternate between heads and tails. Probability only truly becomes certain when using large numbers like millions, billions, and trillions. Understandably, you can't go through a million auto attacks in a single game, and so this pity system is put in place to assure that probability with a smaller sample size. My problem with the system is that 1, the game never tells you this, despite being a very impactful thing that I feel like players should know about. 2, it effectively leads to crit chance being a complete lie. I don't feel like going through the mathematics and all, but back to the 25% example, say it goes from a 25% to 50% to 75% to 100%, making it so you're guaranteed to get a critical strike once every 4 autos at the least. However, if you average all those numbers together, your crit chance is a lot higher than 25%, because it's not 25, 25, 25, 25. Third, and most importantly, the pity system never works in reverse. It helps you when you're unlucky with RNG by preventing you from chain missing crits, but it doesn't compensate you by preventing you from chain landing crits. You can land 4 crits in a row at 25% through sheer dumb luck, and then the pity system will still kick in to help you land that 5th critical strike shortly after. Moreover, it's actually possible to build pity with low crit chance by attacking minions, and if say a 25% chance you didn't crit for 3 or 4 auto attacks, you can then try attacking an enemy champion, and that will have a higher chance of critically striking. That's hardly what I would call fair, all the upside with no downside to balance it out. Something more lighthearted would do well to end off the video, I think. Something else I want to talk about, or rather a bunch of tiny little things, are the inconsistencies that are present throughout the game from either a narrative or logical standpoint. I understand that when it comes to making practical sense, games are afforded some semblance of creative licensing and suspension of disbelief. The idea of Draven carrying a bottomless pocket dimension of throwing axes in his back pocket isn't supposed to make physical sense in the slightest, but that being said, there are some, how you may say, missed opportunities about the game that I took notice of, and many of you as well. Couple things like, for instance, why does Brand not have some kind of resistance or immunity to burn effects like Leandri's and Ignite? The guy's literally on fire and enjoys being on fire. Another one would be, why is Lee Sin able to be blinded and nearsighted when he's already blind? Now if you're trying to counter-argue by saying if Riot did that then it would make the game more matchup dependent instead of skill, to which I somewhat agree. Then again, it's not like they haven't played into this on their end. For years, Cassiopeia wasn't allowed to buy boots because snakes don't need boots. But by that logic, why do Kayle, Janna, and Zona require boots? They levitate. You can't just do it for one champion and not for all of them. I'm just kidding, I know it would make the game needlessly more complex than it already is. I couldn't help but chuckle when I read your guys' comments like, why does Smolder, who shoots fire, do physical damage while Jax hitting you really hard with the lamppost does magic damage? I know, it's not supposed to make complete sense. Still though, it would be interesting if champions had more unique properties. The champion team has implemented lore-accurate mechanics before. Take Sejuani, her passive Frost Armor gives her slow immunity to highlight how she's used to the harsh cold of Freljord already. That slowing, commonly associated with ice, doesn't affect her that much. Something to think about. There are definitely some interesting design choices with the game. Personally, I don't think we should have the first 3 though. Wild Red doesn't have unit collision or Z-axis. I don't see why League should either. But what do you guys think? Do you agree that we should take them out of the game, or do you believe they should stay? Feel free to share in the comments down below. that'll be all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you'd like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars and join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.